Did you guys have a good weekend? Excellent. I don't see any casts or bandages, so I'm going to assume both of you are relatively safe. Excellent. Today, what I wanted to talk about was, and did either of you vote? Today was voting day. Okay. I got my stuff in the mail maybe 2 weeks ago and sent it off last week, so I didn't even get a sticker or anything. That's so sad. What I wanted to do today was talk about last week's stuff and then the stuff that's also due on Sunday. And last week's stuff had to do with art history, art movements, and color theory. And then today, this week on Sunday is due the annotated bibliography. So I wanted to talk about all those things. And since there's only a couple of people today, when I ask for questions, would you please try to think of what other people might ask that are in the class too? Okay. First off, with the color theory stuff, it's just an introduction to color theory. But one thing that I've gotten every once in a while is that every once in a while I have a student that will go in to like Home Depot or Lowe's or Walmart and just get all the color chips that they can for that collage. And I've had some people get accosted by clerks that were concerned that the students are taking advantage of the free stuff. And so rather than having the students be all indignant and tell the person, well, if it's not free, you shouldn't tell everybody it is. I just would say that it's a good idea to go and get your stuff from a couple different places. So load up on style magazines and stuff like that at Lowe's and Home Depot, just some at one place, some at the other, and grab some more stuff like color chips and stuff like that at the Walmart paint counter. Of course, the really large Walmart that's over by Home Depot, the parking lot really kind of sucks. And it'd probably be better if you parked in the Home Depot parking lot and just walked over, just because of all the people there, especially with Thanksgiving coming around the corner. Were you guys able to navigate the color wheel stuff okay and kind of understand what's going on with that assignment? You think so? Did you have any questions about it?
I'm confused about the 12 different studies.
Well, there are only 6 different studies.
Oh.
The color field one is where you look at isn't that I'm talking about the one that you make the cube with. The 12 studies was for the value, which was the previous week.
Oh, I get the cube one.
Okay, all right. And the 12 value studies is you can't spend more than how much time did I say on them? Like 15, 20 minutes a piece, something like that. I want you to spend about that much time on them. And basically, you have your 3 different colors of stuff you're working with. You do an egg, a rock, and a stack of books in each of the 3 colors. So that gives you 9. And then the last 3, you use some of each of the 3 different colors in all 3 of them. So when you're done, say the colors you come up with are brown, yellow, and dark brown for the coffee. You'll have one of each color for each of the 3 subject matters, and then one of each of the subject matters with all 3 colors. And that gives you the 12. Does that help? Vaguely, kind of, sort of? Okay. All right. I'm glad you understand the color cube thing, because it's a lot easier if I'm in front of you guys so I can kind of show you what I'm talking about. It's really difficult when we're online, but I think a couple people ask questions, and it seems like most everybody gets it. Excuse me. We may not be able to go very long if I lose my voice again. Right. The next thing I wanted to talk about is, oh, wait a sec. Let me write down people's names. We've got okay, almost, and Casey. Okay. I don't know, Casey, with the color of your hoodie, all that's showing up on my screen is the very peak of it. I don't know if you guys ever saw the Conehead movie, but I just see this top part of her head right there with the sweater top coming up, and it just reminds me of Dan Aykroyd. Anyway, the next thing I wanted to talk about was art history. I think were you guys able to make it through all those videos? Because it is quite a bit. There are a lot of videos, but they are all pretty important. If you haven't watched them all, make sure that you watch all of them. And you can do other things where you're watching them too. A lot of it is just somebody talking. But art history, I really liked what the one person said of 10 things to think about when you address art history. And the last one was just enjoy the art for what it is. I think that's the most important thing. But a lot of the times I see that people coming into art history for the first time make an assumption that I don't think is really good. But it's one of these assumptions that all of us make all the time, that wherever we are, whatever time period it is, where we are is the most advanced and the best. It doesn't matter which country we're in. It doesn't matter what time it is. Wherever we are as the observer, we think that we're the best. And that's a natural assumption to make, but I don't think it's really a good one. Remember when we were talking about Egyptians? Why Egyptian art in particular? Did people draw the way they did and paint the way they did, our ancestors, because they had to, or because that's what they wanted to do? You guys remember that question? What's the answer? Did they not know any better, or were they doing it for specific reasons?
Wasn't that the style back in the day? Or that's how they did their art because it's what was done by everyone?
Yeah, it's a style thing. And you look at that, particularly Egyptian art. In the tomb paintings, you have the triangular frontal view of the torso. You have the arms in perfect profile, and you have all the toes lined up evenly. You have a very stylized face, and like Kendall said, it was very stylistic. But you look at a lot of the tomb paintings where they show images of life on the farm, for example. You see very naturalistic looking people in natural poses, and they're in naturalistic perspective. And this is like right next to that very Egyptian style imagery that we're so familiar with. And I think it shows that our ancestors did what they did because that was the style, not because they weren't smart enough to do it any different. But that's what they were expected to do. A big part of it was, and for a lot of cultures, that was the spirituality and religion. And the things that were important enough to write down and record were important enough to show as symbols or parts of that spirituality or religion. Our ancestors, for example, when they did paintings like through the Renaissance and things like that, the two most common subject matters were scenes from the Bible. That was everybody's religion. excuse me, and important governmental events. This is in Europe particularly, this is in a time period where everybody knew, and I say knew because this is the assumption everybody made, that the rulers were the rulers because that's what God ordained. And so when you're doing important governmental events, it fits almost into the similar category as the religious art, because it was just something that supported the religious or spiritual view of the time. Now today, we don't see an awful lot of that except for dramatic effect, or when somebody is setting out specifically to do it, make religious art. 500 years ago, there really wasn't much of a distinction. Nobody set out to make religious art. You did what you were commissioned to do, and most of the time, how we would view it would be religious art. But it's important to make the assumption that when we go through art history, that we look at, and when we look at our ancestors' work, that they knew what they were doing. Because we live today and we live past them, doesn't mean we're the best and the brightest and the smartest. We're just different. Now, another thing I wanted to mention was art movements. We talked about, going back to that one lady that talks about 10 different perspectives of art history. Do you guys remember what the 10th one was? The most important one? She said that the most important, what's that, Leah?
Sorry,
Oh, I thought you were turning in to
remember.
turn off the microphone. No, she said that the most important one is to look at the art for the art's sake and just enjoy it for what it is. There are things that we do today that our ancestors couldn't imagine working with, and things that our ancestors worked with all the time that we really can't get a hold of today, media-wise. Can you guys think of 3 media that we use today that our ancestors didn't even dream of, just in making art? I think a big one is digital art. Most book illustrations, most things like that, it's done digitally. Do you think that 300 years ago, anybody even thought that was possible? Or even conceived of a world where it could be? What's another one?
Does photography fall under digital art?
Well, it's kind of funny because now it's mostly digital photography, isn't it? But when we talked about Star Wars, they used actual cellulose. So I think that photography, just even regular photography with film, is something that 300 years ago nobody even thought was possible, would have thought was possible. So yeah, that's an excellent one. Can you think of a third one? You guys, I'm sure that you guys are way too mature to ever play Dungeons and Dragons. Am I right? Well, I actually like the action figures, or not the action figures, but the little models. And many of those you can order online digitally printed. They can actually make little inch height images of your character with your face on it. That's digitally printed. And that is something nobody even thought of even 20 years ago. Digital art was still something people were playing around with in the 80s, 40 years ago. Now, can anybody think of things that our ancestors did that we don't even touch anymore? I think one is depending on the danger it is to a country's resources, one of the things our ancestors used a lot of was ivory. And new ivory is really difficult to get a hold of. And for a while, you could only buy ivory if you could prove that it was, or you could only use ivory in art if you could prove that it was harvested before restrictions. If it was, and you could prove that it came from a country where there weren't embargoes on the ivory. And now one of the biggest growing ivory trades is actually mastodon ivory. And there's coming out of the Russian Federation. And now there's going to be more regulations on that as time goes by too. But our ancestors carved ivory all the time. You see these little teeny knick-knack boxes, like ring boxes and pin boxes, that are incredibly beautiful, that are carved out of ivory, from 800 to 1,000 years ago. Anybody think of any others? The Germans from about the 12th to the 15th century were experts in leatherwork. And there is some extraordinarily impressive sculptural leatherwork for saddles and accoutrements coming out of just the early Renaissance. That's something that is coming back. There is some really nice leatherwork today, but it's just not very common. You walk into the governor's office today, and there's a good chance you're not going to see a saddle and boots on display, like they would have done years ago. One that I'm thinking of is, I think it was 6th or 7th century Japan. All the bronze in the country was confiscated by the ruling elite. And so there was no coinage or anything. Family heirlooms were stolen by the government, and they were all melted together to make what at that time was a wonder of the world's tallest Buddha statue out of cast bronze. It's called the Nara Daibutsu, and you can look that up. But for the next 300 years, because they could not sculpt in bronze, which they had gotten used to, Japanese artists, they started doing layered paper and lacquer sculptures. So they would make these incredible sculptures out of what essentially was a longer lasting paper mache. And some of these things are still around. They're over 1,000 years old, and they're still around. That's something that people just simply don't do anymore. There are paper mache sculptors, but nobody, I don't know of anybody right now who actively does the lacquered paper like those 1,000-year-old Japanese sculptures. And there's other stuff like that too. But again, it just goes to show that just because they are removed from us in time and place doesn't mean either one of us is smarter or better. But I will say that we want to assume that we're the best because we have air flight, but there is evidence to show that there was manned air flight before the hot air balloons in France, by the way. Just something interesting, and it's not an ancient aliens kind of thing, it's an actual thing. But unless, of course, you really love ancient aliens, then I'm sorry I said anything derogatory towards them. But our ancestors knew a lot of stuff. They were really smart. And art history is just about finding out how different people express themselves, like Kendall said, in their style. And that's different all around the world from all through the times. And because their style is different from us, that doesn't mean they know less or more. The third thing, I wanted to talk about art movements. This is a little bit different. Art history is about how art changes and fluxes over time, how cultures interact with each other. You can see that there's a lot of incredibly beautiful floral imagery and painting in Turkey as different cultures came together. Turkey was the bridge between Europe, North Africa, and Asia. And so for about an 800-year period, there was an incredible growth of art there as all these different cultures got along together. There were Ottoman kings that were Muslim who would send Armenian artists to Italy so that they could learn how to paint with Italian masters, then go back to Armenia and paint in their Christian churches. Excuse me. And so we do see a lot of cultural cross-pollination in areas like that. Now, art movements are more, they happen a little bit faster than just art history. There's a little bit of a separation because an art movement is people share an outlook on the world, or they share a way to react to the world, or they share a philosophy. And that philosophy, a lot of the times, is a reaction to something. It grows from something that they've learned and how they see the world. And sometimes they're responding to somebody by moving forward. Sometimes they're responding to somebody by retrenching, which is readdressing a previous art form that may be outdated or people think is out of style. Some examples of this are Braque and Picasso. They're the ones that started Cubism. They were heavily informed by the world at that time. People were moving incredibly fast. You could get across the Atlantic Ocean in less than a couple of weeks. I mean, people were moving so fast, it was just hard to believe. A car could go over 25 miles an hour. And they were also informed by, they saw rock art that was from Zimbabwe, where these Zimbabwean artists from 1,000 years ago painted people or depicted human beings. It looks like in the same body, you may get images from several different portions of the person's life. So they're kind of snapshots of time put together into one body. And they thought about that. And so they started exploring perspective. What if you could portray multiple views of the same thing all at once? And that's how Cubism developed. People reacted to that. They responded to that. People started questioning what's the validity of art when it looks like this. I don't understand it. And instead of trying to learn about it, they derided it. They didn't try to find out, bless you. They didn't try to find out what Braque and Picasso were thinking when they were doing this. And so there was a retrenchment in some communities of art where they would go back to a more romantic styles of art, but with a more contemporary sensibility regarding color use. And then you get other people that they felt it gave them permission to do what they wanted. And you get somebody like Mondrian, who was so sick and tired of all of this fast-paced economy and everybody moving so quick that he started painting canvases where he would do a landscape, breaking it down to just horizontal and vertical lines and getting rid of all the color except for the primary colors in green. And that's it. So he would super simplify. And in reaction to that, other people would just start looking at points of light. They started learning about rods and cones in the eyes. And so you get people like Seurat was a little bit earlier than that, who started just doing paintings with dots. And you get Monet and Manet, who just started painting instead of trying to do relating form, they would just paint areas of color, and then your eye could piece the image together. They were both predated the Cubism, but all that is in the background. That spawns another wave of art movement. You get the Dadaists that start questioning the validity of the art community in general and start asking questions about what is art. You get other people that way simplify things, and they start doing wave paintings and zip paintings. And you can look these things up where they are trying to communicate something about divine inspiration using only a single line on a gigantic white canvas. One painting that's famous is a zip painting that has a vertical orange line and a white canvas, and it relates to Moses communicating with the burning bush. But he parsed it down to the most minimal thing he could think of. Then later artists responded by doing what they thought was the bare minimum of presenting an object that was art. And they were, of course, called the minimalists. You have people responding to that, making art where they wanted to paint more than the human eye could possibly perceive, and they were called the hyperrealists. So do you see how the difference is that art history kind of shows how art relates what the culture's thought through time, and art movements are kind of specific moments in that time progression that kind of respond and reflect on each other. So there's it's part of art history, but it's a little bit different. And so when you go back and look at those videos, I want you to think about that as you move forward. Now, does anybody have any questions about the annotated bibliography? And if you don't, think about, do you think that there might be questions other people in the class might have?
Is it for one artist or multiple?
You use the same artist that you picked in the earlier assignment, where you just wrote a reflection on one artist's work. That's an excellent question. You just use that same artist, and you can do it about that artist and what they produce over their life. You can do that about some shows that they've done, or you can do it about a particular or a mix of those. Like maybe you're really impressed with uh, Damien Hirst's shipwreck show, and so you do some articles about what some critics have thought about that. Maybe you find a video about him working in his studio, and then you show a couple of his pieces from that show. Does that make sense? So it doesn't have to be all the same thing, or you don't have to do a biography of the artist. I don't want you to do a biography, but it does need to be about one artist. So that's a very good question. Can I get a question from Leah and Casey?
On Canvas it says like having 3 citations. Do we need like can we
Well,
do
I thought
more?
it said 5.
Oh, it said like 5 sources.
Yeah, there's supposed to be a citation for each of the 5 sources.
Oh.
Could you take a picture of that and send it to me so I can correct it?
Maybe I missed it. I don't know. Because I see it say 5 sources too.
Yeah, there needs to be, you need to cite each of your sources. And that means you follow those rules on how to write an annotated bibliography or and do the MLA citation. And you follow that pattern for each of the 5 sources that you picked. So that's a really good question. And then for each, so it'll look like it'll have the creative who authored the content. Then it will have the title of the content. It'll have where you found it, like the website. If it's from a magazine, what the citation was, or a YouTube video, or whatever. And then at the very end of all that, you will add in parentheses the phrase accessed on, and then write the date. On the magical internet universe, there is a number of different programs where you can go in, type in a website, and then type in the date that you accessed it, and it will show you exactly what you saw on that day. So even if the content gets overwritten. So very cool stuff. But yeah, that's an excellent question. And everybody will need to do 5 citations. And then after you write the citation down and include that phrase, accessed on the date, then you'll write one paragraph which describes what it was, and then a second paragraph as to why it's important regarding your study on this artist. And pretend that you're still alive, your head in a jar 100 years from now, and you're thinking to yourself, you're so wise and smart that the new memories have kicked out all the old memories. So you're thinking to yourself, I came across this artist, but I can't remember who this artist is. And then you see your annotated bibliography that you wrote this week. And that's what you need to remember everything there is that's important about that artist. That's who you're writing to. Your head in the jar self 100 years from now. And then you can also use this as kind of the foundation for your notes for when you do your PowerPoint video presentation. All right, Casey, do you have a question?
Can we use whatever sources we'd want to?
As long as you can cite them and you follow the rules that I mentioned in the description, which is be aware of biases by the author and search engine, and then also be aware that it needs to be, well, there's probably 3 things. The second thing to be aware of is it copying something else? And if it's not, if it's its own thing, then that's great too. And then the third thing is it giving you enough information to be useful? So I wanted to cite something that I found in an article about an artist, but it ended up being only 2 sentences in the entire article. And so I really couldn't use it because it really was not helpful. So those are the things to think about. But yeah, that was a great question. Excellent. All right. Any other questions for me about any of the things we talked about? Is that a no? All right. Excellent. Well, I will be putting out the PowerPoint thing this week, and then hopefully within the next week or so as well, do the piece on describing what you need to do about Sundiata, the artwork for that. And then we have about a month and a half left in the semester. So hopefully, and I will get everything graded hopefully by the end of next week, so everybody knows where they are and you can ask questions and stuff like that. All right. I hope you guys have an absolutely wonderful weekend, or week rather, and I look forward to seeing you all on Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
All right,
you.
we'll see you. Okay.